Hello, you're listening to What's on Your Mind, a journey from the mind to the mic. And I am Abhigya, your host for today. Brought to you by the Psychology Department of NMIMS, we are here to have clear, raw conversations about mental health. And this is a safe space. Our topic for today is a rather sensitive one, a topic that is quite prevalent but very silent indeed. It's about suicide prevention. This podcast would contain discussion about suicide and other mental health issues, so this could be triggering for some, hence, viewer discretion is advised. There has been a myth that those who talk about suicide will never attempt it. But surprisingly, 7 out of 10 people who attempt suicide have given clear cut indication that they are crying out for help. Why? Because they want to be saved. They want you to hear to what they are saying, and more importantly, listen to what they are not saying. So today we are here to just make a small impact as budding psychologists in our own small way. Joining us today is a mental health professional, Miss Prerna Yadav. Prerna is a counselling psychologist with a master's degree from the Tata Institute of Social Science, and she has extensive experience in suicide prevention and mental health support. In her career spanning 8 plus years, she has worked with corporate employees, youth volunteers in suicide prevention. Currently, she runs her own venture, Ra, where she offers training to early career psychologists for suicide prevention and other challenges related to mental health issues. Prerna, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for speaking to me.
Prerna, could you share your experience working as a first responder at a crisis prevention helpline?
Yes, for sure. So, working at a crisis prevention helpline, we would get a lot of calls from people who were experiencing suicidal thoughts, and a lot of times from people who were also attempting suicide. So, that was a very challenging situation, very difficult situation. And as a counselor, I was also trained in certain practices, certain protocols to assist people who were experiencing high distress. So, the very first thing that we did when we got a call from somebody who was experiencing high distress was attempting suicide, we would request them. Firstly, we would appreciate them for giving us a call because they were experiencing a lot of distress. Then we would request them to step back and we would engage in a conversation with them. We would make an attempt to help them calm themselves, relax, and soothe themselves, and then encourage them to reach out to a trustworthy person so that they can be helped and they can be saved in that situation. So, those were some practices, some protocols that we followed as a therapist on a suicide prevention helpline.
Okay, and everyone knows what suicide is and the different ways people choose to end their lives. And a lot of time there are narratives like suicide is for people who are weak minded or who do not have a lot of willpower. But they're not aware of the actual psychological driving force behind them taking a drastic step like that. So, could you help us from a psychosocial perspective, telling us what goes on when someone is thinking of attempting suicide?
Sure. There are many factors that influence high distress, suicidal thoughts. So, there are certain personal factors which involve genetics, which involve biology, some comorbidity with a mental illness. And apart from that, also, there are some interpersonal factors. So, say some conflicts within the family, within the community. And apart from that, there are also certain macro level factors. For example,
Okay.
if you look at people who are marginalized and oppressed or at a social level, survivors of violence, survivors of abuse, who have been going through very difficult situations for a very prolonged period of time, they are likely to experience high distress, suicidal thoughts. So there are many factors that influence this, and it is a very complex issue. So while we work with clients, we look at different issues, we address different factors that are leading to high distress.
Okay, and so recently, last week only, I read in the news about this one elderly woman who was attempting suicide and who tried to give her own life by jumping off from the Atal Setu bridge. But she was survived, like she was rescued by her cab driver, who took prompt action in saving her when he saw her alarming behavior. So, people who are having suicidal thoughts can go through a lot of distress, and how we as individuals can see warning signs around them and help them out. So, could you point out certain emotional warning signs that we can see and we can help out someone who is in need, who would be in need?
So people who often experience suicidal thoughts, like you mentioned, there is a lot of distress that they are going through. So there are certain signs which indicate distress. So especially if you're talking about emotional signs, so people who are generally experiencing suicidal thoughts, they will feel very sad. There will be a lot of low mood. They will also probably express with a lot of crying, and a lot of times they will also express through certain messages. So they may say things like, there is no point to life anymore. A lot of people also take to social media to share their thoughts and share their feelings, and a lot of times there is a lot of helplessness and hopelessness that they experience, and they talk about a lot of loneliness, isolation, hitting a dead end, not knowing where to go, feeling very directionless. And yes, so these are certain signs, and a lot of times they will also make an attempt to withdraw socially. They will not have a lot of interactions with people. They will want to apologize profusely for certain mistakes that they have made in the past. So these are certain signs that indicate high distress. And at any point, if we see our loved ones going through showing any of these signs, we can always reach out to them. We can always have an interaction with them, and we can ask them out of concern. We can say that this is something that I have noticed. I've been seeing this since quite some time, and I've been really concerned about your well being. And if you want to share, I'm here for you. I'm here to listen to you. So, a lot of times when we offer that supportive space, people feel heard and people feel that they can trust you and they can share.
So when someone shares their emotional distress, it's not attention seeking.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It is a cry for help. And people who experience suicidal thoughts, they indicate in certain way they are wanting to seek support.
It is quite alarming to see that suicide is the fourth largest cause of death, usually among the 15 to 29-year-old age group, the early adult age group. Like as we see in Kota, which is known for their coaching centers, annually there are more than 15 reported cases of suicides. This could be due to academic stress or competition or just the performance, the pressure of performing well. So, what makes this age group so susceptible to suicide?
Yes, you are, as you rightly pointed out, the statistics are very, very alarming. And if you look at the demographic profile of individuals who are experiencing suicidal thoughts, they are mostly adolescents and young adults. So, if we look at this life stage from the developmental perspective, we see that this life stage has a lot of transitions. So, if you see adolescents, they're experiencing a lot of transitions cognitively, emotionally, even sexually. So, this is the age where people also explore their gender identity, their sexuality. Peer relationships also go through a lot of transitions, relationships with family, and especially because you mentioned quota. Now, this is the place where a lot of these adolescents and young adults also go to prepare for their engineering and medical entrances,
Correct.
and they are also living away from home. So there is a lot of homesickness, isolation, and loneliness. And living that independent life is a huge transition for a lot of adolescents and young adults. And that is like an added pressure, that added stressor that they are dealing with. And apart from that, also, like you rightly mentioned, preparing for an examination like the engineering entrance, the JEE mains, the JEE advanced, and even the NEET. The nature of these examinations is very competitive, and a lot of times it puts a lot of pressure on these adolescents, these young adults, and that leads to a lot of distress. Also, they experience suicidal thoughts because a lot of times there is this sense of hopelessness also, because there is a lot of hope with which they prepare for these exams, they appear for these exams, and a lot of times when things don't work out, it is very disappointing for them and even for their families sometimes.
So, which is why they think killing, like taking their own life, would be the best option viable.
Yeah, and that is solely because of the hopelessness and helplessness that they feel because of the situation they are in.
Prerna, as a psychologist, can you tell us about some crucial risk factors that we should be aware of to help someone who would be having suicidal thoughts or ideation?
Yes, certainly. So, from what I have noticed, is that people who are going through a mental illness for a very prolonged period of time, and they have been dealing with it for a very long time. So, that increases the risk, the vulnerability to experience high distress or suicidal thoughts. A lot of times, a lot of physical illnesses also, especially illnesses that impact your functionality and which deprive you of opportunities of social interaction, of being able to do something in life, probably in the career space or relationships. So, something that impacts your functionality, that also increases the vulnerability to high distress. And apart from that, also, as we were speaking previously, also survivors of abuse and violence, especially communities that have been systemically oppressed. So, if you talk about the queer community and the oppression they go through, the discrimination they go through, a lot of times people with disability also who do not have access to equal opportunities, they go through a lot of distress. So, these are communities that also experience a lot of distress because of the systemic oppression they experience. So, when I have met clients and I have worked with clients, I have noticed that these are situations that increase the risk to high distress and suicidal thoughts.
Okay. And like, do every individual at one point of time think of ending their life? Like,
Well, it is difficult to make that as a generic statement, but if you consider certain life situations that can be very difficult for people, yes, it can be a thought. And if you look at suicidal thoughts also, it is like a continuum. So, again, for some people, it may just be a passing thought. It may just come and it may slide. So while in my therapy sessions also, when I ask this question to my clients that have you at any point experienced suicidal thoughts, they tell me yes, it is there, but at the same time we are not going to make an attempt. We do have the resources to cope with it. So then there are some people who have it as a passing thought. There are some people for whom the distress is so high that they find it very difficult to contain their emotions, but at the same time they're able to withhold, they're able to keep themselves away from making an attempt.
okay.
So that is another community of people. Then there is another community of people who find it very hard to contain, and they may also go ahead and make an attempt. So it's like a continuum. Everybody's experience of feeling that distress and experiencing suicidal thoughts is very different. And as we talk to them, we will understand what they are feeling.
Creating a supportive environment is very essential. Hence, we can take certain steps to prevent suicide. Nowadays, we see universities putting a cage on the ceiling fans or a grills in their windows. And as much as it could be a precautionary measure, but just precautionary measures to prevent suicide will not prevent the thoughts or the suicidal ideation that an individual would have. So, can you tell us some steps that universities or colleges can take at an individual level to help prevent suicide?
Yes, I think, like you rightly mentioned, this is a systemic issue. And if we need to offer support to somebody who's experiencing suicidal thoughts, the intervention need to happen at a systemic level,
Correct.
right? So, if colleges and universities want to prevent suicides and want to offer support, there has to be support at all levels. So while I was working with some colleges and universities to help them implement certain suicide prevention programs, what we tried and did was to create like a support system, a network of support rather. So if a student is experiencing suicidal thoughts, then where will the student be most comfortable going and talking about it? So they will probably be most comfortable talking to a peer mentor or a peer supporter.
A friend.
So the first plan of action was to identify peer supporters who will be willing to offer support to students in high distress.
Hmm.
And in order to identify those peer supporters, we also need to offer them adequate training, because a lot of times people don't know how to respond to certain disclosures. So, identifying peer supporters, training them, and then after peer supporters, the next people in that network would be faculty members, because they are the people who are the most accessible to the students. So how can we reach out to the faculty? How can we also reach out to the hostel wardens if they are available, and how they can also be trained in some skills of responding? And then once we have reached out to them, we can also involve the management, if that is okay. Maybe a couple of people in the management who can mobilize that support for the student. And then we can also bring in mental health professionals like the psychologist who is on campus, and some psychologists who are also working outside of campus and how they can offer support to the student. So if we need to implement this at the college and the university level, we need to begin from the student community before we reach the mental health professionals.
And for a student who might be experiencing extreme emotions, for anyone, for us also who might be experiencing a lot of emotions, it's important to manage them and to actually, because at one point of time someone would be having an overwhelming thought of emotions, and at that point if that emotions are managed, then maybe the distress is considerably reduced. So what strategies or safety plans can be used to reduce distress and to help someone cope with the overwhelming emotions that they would have at a point?
Yeah, certainly. Like you said, that again, when a person experiences suicidal thoughts, at that point the distress is really high. So usually, when I work with clients, I ask them that when you experience these thoughts, what are some coping strategies that you use? So I make it a point to have to listen to what is helping them first, because that is what they are likely to resort to for the very first time. So a lot of times people say that, okay, we just try and distract ourselves, we listen to some soothing and calming music, we take a couple of deep breaths, we try and also ground ourselves. So there are some people who just look at their surroundings, try to bring themselves back to the present, and try to ground themselves in the present reality. So just some simple tips like looking around you, noticing things around you, maybe wrapping up a blanket around you also, if that helps, or hugging a pillow. So these are some strategies that just bring down the intensity of the emotions, because they can help you ground yourself. Taking a couple of deep breaths, grabbing a glass of water. So these are also some strategies that help in soothing some difficult emotions. And another thing that we also introduce is that we help the client identify a trustworthy person. So,
Okay.
because a lot of times you need help, you need somebody to talk to. So, if you can identify one person who you would like to talk to when you are deeply distressed, so if you can just give them a call and continue talking to them for some time. If you're not comfortable sharing your emotions, you can just talk to them about something, so that
Right.
you're able to engage yourself in a conversation. And the next step of intervention is also to reach out to a crisis prevention helpline, which often has trained volunteers or trained professionals who can also offer that professional support which is needed.
Okay, and so as we conclude the podcast, could you also help us with some resources with someone who might be experiencing extreme distress or someone who would be having suicidal thoughts at this time?
Certainly. So there are quite a few suicide prevention helplines, crisis prevention helplines that are working in our country. So, to name a few, Vandrewala Foundation, ICALL Helpline, MANN Talks. So, these are some helplines that are offering professional support for any situation that involves a crisis. So, at any point, if an individual is experiencing suicidal thoughts, they can give them a call. They can speak to a qualified and trained professional, talk about their distress. So, that support is essential in a crisis situation. But apart from that, also, because they are also dealing with other challenges in their life, it is important to seek professional help from a therapist. So, from a psychologist, so they can also seek long term therapy, apart, because again there is professional support required for other challenges that they are dealing with. So they also seek long term support on the side, and then for crisis support they can also reach out to helplines, and a lot of these helplines also offer that long term support that people need in a time like this. So seeking professional help, also keeping in touch with trustworthy people, getting in touch with a community that is more supportive, maybe friends, family members, or becoming a part of a support group also that understands your distress. These are some things that can help.
And how can we support a loved one who is feeling suicidal? Or maybe what message do you have to give someone who has lost someone to suicide?
Certainly. I think being a caregiver or a supporter to somebody who's experiencing suicidal thoughts, it can be very challenging because we are very concerned for our loved ones. So, a lot of times the immediate response can be that of shock or that of
Denial.
a lot of stress. And while I do understand that it is very difficult to contain emotions at that point of time, but all your loved one needs to hear at that time is that you're there for them. So at that point of time, if we can just hold space for them, tell them that, we are here for you, firstly appreciate them and thank them for sharing and confiding in them, because a lot of times it takes a lot of strength to be able to confide in somebody. So the very fact that they have come and they have confided in you, that in itself shows the kind of trust they have. So firstly thanking them for sharing, and also assuring them that you're there by their side, assuring them that you're there to support them, to help them, and also helping them with some of these calming strategies, soothing strategies that we talked about, helping them take a few deep breaths, grabbing a glass of water, just helping them lie down and relax for some time, and then also helping them connect with a professional psychologist, professional therapist. You can also help them connect with a crisis prevention helpline if you feel that they need that support at that point. So these are some steps that a loved one can take. And coming to the other part of the question, which is about people who have lost loved ones to suicide. Now, with deaths that have happened due to suicide, unfortunately, it is not a loss that is recognized or acknowledged by the society, because people are, of course, afraid to talk about it. They're afraid to share with their loved ones that we have lost somebody to suicide. And that often makes it very difficult for them to grieve. So one thing that is very important, it is very important for them to also seek professional support, because that is the space where they will get a chance to share without any judgment, without any fear of judgment, without any fear of, okay, how will this be taken and can I talk about this. So they will get that space to share. A lot of times there are support groups also for people who have lost their loved ones to suicide. So a lot of times when you hear narratives of other people, you find people who you can relate with, you find people who understand what you're going through. So it's very important to seek support for caregivers, especially because in a situation like this, the community support that people usually have is not available. Because of the shame and stigma associated with it, unfortunately. So it's very important for them to seek professional support.
Okay. Thank you so much, Prerna, for joining us and giving your insights on suicide and suicide, preventing suicide, because I don't think at this generation people know much about suicide. They just find it the last option and the most viable option. And maybe about what you shared, people now know that help is available and they can reach out whenever required.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.